Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business-owning families. This conversation today represents progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business-owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship of the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful for Jay Hughes and his foundation. Last month, we heard from Seth Godin about his book, The Song of Significance. And before we begin, I wanted to mention a couple of other exciting things that are coming up. Next month, we will be hosting Jay Hughes about his book, The Cycle of the Gift. And I think we should just get to the star of the show here. So I'm going to introduce Karen Dillon and stop sharing my screen here. My guest today is Karen Dillon. Karen's the former editor of the Harvard Business Review, is a prolific writer whose works have include several best-selling titles. Her latest is The Microstress Effect. We're not talking about that book today, but maybe another day. Dillon is also the editorial director at Banyan Global, a group of family business advisors that bring together deeply integrated and multidisciplinary expertise in family, business, finance, ownership, and philanthropy. We have mutual friends in that group, Karen. But today, Karen is joining us to talk about her book that she co-authored with the late Clayton Christensen, How Will You Measure Your Life? Karen, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
I'm so happy to be here, Dave. Thank you for asking me.
So, Karen, if I could, I would like to start on a personal note. I want you to give us a little bit of background. You spent 8 years as the editor of the Harvard Business Review and continue as a contributing editor. I imagine that comes with a lot of stress and pressure that probably none of us can imagine. The thought leadership that gets shared from those pages changes businesses, impacts economies, and really changes people's lives. Can you take us behind the curtain on what that has been like and how that experience relates to the question of how will you measure your life?
So I've always considered it a privilege, my work with Harvard Business Review when I was on staff and editor, and now because I think it is a privilege to get to talk to and exchange ideas with and help some of the world's greatest thinkers actually share their ideas with an audience that may not be academic. So we used to consider ourselves the bridge to academia. I will tell you, I actually once was on a phone call with Peter Drucker early in my days at Harvard Business Review, and I worked with him when I actually worked with his wife, Mrs. Drucker, starts a business when I was at Inc. magazine. So the Venn diagram is very cool. But it's a privilege, but it is a job that is fast-paced, that you have to sort through complicated ideas and work to not only make them accessible to people, but make them visually beautiful and put them in a magazine. So it was a job I loved, but I probably consider it the sort of peak of my career, but a privileged experience.
Very cool. Well, we appreciate the work that you've done there. You must have started at age 6 then, if you worked with Peter.
House points for Dave.
Well, let's jump into the book. I think there's a number of people that have already read the book, but there are some on the call that have not. I always enjoy the backstory of, kind of how the book came about. Can you tell us a little bit about how this concept came about? And obviously the book is written in first person too. So as an editor, what was the challenge there, and just the backstory, a little bit of how the book came to be.
So Clayton Christensen, the professor who deserves all of the accolades he's been given over the years, he was once named the world's most influential thinker, things like that. He was someone I knew of, but I didn't know personally. He was just in the pantheon of the greats at Harvard Business School. And when I was the editor, there was a double issue we were trying to put together. It was spring of 2010. And I was really just looking around for an extra article to put in to make the double issue more doubly, and had heard from students that were about to graduate at Harvard Business School that Clay had been asked to speak to the graduating class. It was the first time, they've now done it every year since, where they had picked someone to speak to them as students. It wasn't sort of chosen by the administration, and that it had been very moving. And that's
So this was an emergent strategy. Clay's
yes, it was. It was a total emergent
yeah.
strategy. It wasn't. It becomes deliberate. That's a great insight, actually. So I literally was like, perfect. Whatever that is, I can turn it into a kind of, we used to call it dads and grad season, the word pearls of wisdom around Father's Day and graduation for people, like a kind of essay. So I'll figure something out. And so I called his office and asked if I could come over and would he be willing to let me to help him turn that into something. And he said yes, which in hindsight I know is crazy because he was one of the busiest people in the universe, and that there was time, and I didn't go that day, but it was pretty close to that day. And long story short, what we talked about on that day led to me helping him write an article for Harvard Business Review called How Will You Measure Your Life, which went viral. It was in the early days of Harvard Business Review having its website, hbr.org, and I think it's the first article that in that framing, hbr.org, actually went viral, went around the world. And really cool thing, and I wish I knew who this was, it was behind the paywall, which in those days people are still trying to figure out. And a student someplace wrote to us and said he had read it through EBSCO at his university, and he thought it was such an important piece that it should be in front of the paywall, free to everyone. And so we did. And then that made it go viral. So working with Clay on the article was the beginning of working with him on the book. But the human story in the middle that makes it really special was when I first started working with him on the article, the talk he'd given to his the graduating class was Clay was bald from chemo. He was undergoing treatment for the same kind of cancer that had taken his father's life. So it was a very sort of powerful moment, but he was and did get into in remission, which was great. But by the time our article came out just a few months later, immediately after it started going viral, Clay had a stroke, which affected only his ability to speak and write. His brain was perfect, other than communicating was challenging for him. So he asked me if I would help him work on a book. And we just had such a great working relationship on the first article that it became a really good partnership with one of his former students who was staying on to work on it, James Allworth. And so the emergent strategy of that became a deliberate strategy.
I love it. Well, perhaps the best way to begin talking about the book is to talk about the end of the book. In the epilogue, you quote our good friend Peter Drucker, and it says that business purpose and business mission are so rarely given adequate thought is perhaps the most important cause of business frustration and failure. So as you think about careers and a life well lived, what is the importance of purpose?
One of the reasons Clay wanted to give this talk to the graduating class, he gave it at the end of every semester, and that he taught to his students, because he felt really strongly, and I couldn't agree more, that life is going to sort of take you in directions and present you with opportunities, and you're just going to float along with the busyness of life, certainly as soon as you graduate. But if you don't ever think about what is your purpose, like what do I want my life to amount to, where am I steering to, you're not gonna get there. You may get someplace, but you don't really have a direction or a goal. And if you don't stop to think about it, there will never seem to be more or better time to think about it. So he initially thought this was a really important message for soon to be graduating students. I, at that point, early, middle of 40-something career professional, thought it was equally important, because I'm through this much of my life and my career. I better think about my purpose before it's, another decade or two passes and I don't like where I ended up. So purpose becomes, it's where you're navigating, it's your North Star, and companies don't think about it enough, and people don't think about it enough. And it's a decision-making tool. If you know what your purpose is and you've thought about it, and it's something that's hard to think about, but you've thought about it, you can make decisions in light of your purpose. Does this keep me on track or not? Is this okay or not? It's a helpful thing to have an idea of what you think your purpose as a human being in this world is, to help you make decisions along the way.
So I imagine writing this with Clay, you're swimming in it. And I just had the experience of rereading the book, a couple of weeks ago. I had read it a long time ago, but it's as relevant, like you say, it's as relevant for someone that's graduating college as it is for someone that's 45 years old or whatever. So what was the personal impact that writing the book had on you? Like how did it affect your emergent strategies or your deliberate strategy?
Meeting Clay that day in his office, and then the months and weeks, the weeks and months afterwards that we ended up working together, totally changed my life. I found his message, his thinking so profoundly moving, it caused me to stop and reevaluate my whole life. I really did my own what I had expected the students might be doing, I ended up doing for myself. So for me, it was a kind of, road to Damascus or smelling salt moment where I recognized that if I didn't have a clear answer to the questions he was asking his students, I was going to drift off. Not terrible. Life was not terrible, but it just wasn't necessarily what I wanted it to be either. So I ended up completely changing my life to align with the purpose that I came to and thought about. I ended up resigning as the editor of Harvard Business Review after a very thoughtful year. I didn't, do it in a dramatic huff. And my husband and I kind of reshaped our life a little bit so that we could be more focused on our family. And then once that felt grounded, I focused on working in different ways and doing meaningful work to me. So it was truly probably the person most affected by what Clay had to say, certainly in the short term, was me.
Amazing. Well, I think Harvard Business Review is grateful for Clay and that you helped write that article, and probably not grateful because you ended up leaving the Harvard Business Review. So there's probably a double edge there. But I loved the structure of the book and how it goes kind of back and forth between theories that Clay taught and then also like personal anecdotes and application. Can you talk about the construction of the book and why you think the construction works so well?
So I did not know many or most of the theories we talk about in the book until I started working with Clay. So I feel like I had a personal master class from the master. So for me, in helping write, again, because he was challenge writing and he got better, but he was challenge writing in the beginning. It was always, can I understand this in a way that I could share with people? And what we ended up structuring the book was the exact same way he talked about this with his students, which was that last class of the semester, of the term, he would write 3 questions on the board. And it's sort of fun to think about the great Clay Christensen, known for his theories on innovation, et cetera. What were those 3 questions that he wanted his students to answer on the last day? And they were very simple questions. How can I find happiness in my personal life? How can I find happiness in my professional life, personal life? And how can I stay out of jail, which everyone always laughs about, but it's how do I maintain my integrity? So we ended up structuring the book in that same way because there are theories that are relevant for each of those questions, to answer each of those questions. And I think from my own experience with the book, I think everyone's sort of in a different place on the question that they're asking. So you can read the whole thing start to finish, you can go to your question, but the goal is that we hope offering these theories, they become tools for people making the decisions to help them answer the questions that Clay asked his class and we ask in the book, those 3 questions.
Well, for me, it just made it so approachable. It wasn't someone telling you what you should do. No one likes to be shoulded. That's not a word, but those theories and then the practical applications and then the stories of how it shows up in businesses was great. That leads me to this next one. Near the beginning of the book, there's a quote by Clay that says, "I don't have an opinion. The theory has an opinion." Can you talk and maybe unpack why Clay used this approach in thinking through strategies and also like how to work with high-powered leaders? Because I imagine, you're working with some A-type personalities that are like, look, if I'm hiring you as a consultant, like tell me what you think, tell me what you want. But can you maybe take us behind the curtains on that?
It was Clay's go-to line, and it was true and relevant. But Clay used to be asked by the great and the good from all over the world to offer his opinion on something. And I've been in his office when there would be high-level politicians calling, CEOs. It was sort of exciting who came to him for the answers. And it started, I think, way back when he was asked, when his first big theory, which was his PhD dissertation that went viral, again, was the theory of disruptive innovation, which a lot of people know explains why it is that established companies end up being disrupted by upstarts. What's happening that does that. And the then chairman and CEO of Intel, a guy called Andy Grove, called him and said, I read your theory. I want you to come and tell us what it means for our chips business. And I think Clay said right from the start, I'll come and tell you about my theory, but I don't know anything about your industry. I can't possibly make any I don't know. But what I can do is share this theory with you so that you can think about, does it apply, in what circumstances, and why? The idea is that theory, which I used to buck using that in Harvard Business Review. It sounded so sort of, not concrete and hard to process exactly. Yeah. They're actually just simple tools to explain what do we know as a predictive tool, what will cause what to happen. And so the theory is never specifically what will happen in this industry on this day in light of this competition, but the theory is, in what circumstances will this kind of response trigger? And so the idea is, we will never tell you, the book, what to think. We'll tell you how to think about it. And we offer up these theories as a toolkit, and you need to decide, is it relevant to you? Is it relevant in your situation? But I literally like to think of it as a toolkit where this theory might be interesting to think about. If this is true in our circumstances, then what does it mean? Or this one might be. So it allowed Clay to never have to be an expert on every industry and problem in the world, but he has some really thought-provoking things to say. Another story that I love that Clay told was that after this all started to really, again, go sort of really spread in the world, he got asked to come to the Department of Defense to talk about his theory. And it turned out when he showed up, it was not just, an internal aide or whatever. It was like the whole top brass of the Department of Defense at that time. And he's, I know nothing about defense, but I will tell you my theory. And he loved that. What happened was, after a little bit, they sort of, all right, we get this theory of disruptive innovation. It applies in our world in that terrorism is disrupting the traditional ways of war that we know. It's a different way of approaching it. So we have to think, if that's our competition, in how do we apply that to our thinking about defense? So a good theory can apply, doesn't apply in every situation. That's where individual judgment comes in, but it can apply in a lot of situations, personal and professional.
So is that just like the magic of Clay, or is that was that his training at Harvard that taught through the lens of theories?
I think it was the magic of Clay. I mean, there are other people and other theories, and Clay loved to use other people's theories that he thought were relevant. We talk about some of them in the book, but I think he found that such a powerful decision-making tool that for him, theory was you need to understand, again, what will cause what to happen. But the magic of Clay was that he explained the theories through stories, personal and case studies, and things that people would understand, so that you could see it and understand it through the lens of an example. But the theory was always the spine of that.
I was always so impressed whenever I would hear him speak about the combination of like the depth of wisdom, but an equally deep humility. Can you talk about that? He just seemed such a humble, always voracious learner. At the same time, like the depth of wisdom and knowledge was incredible.
You described it exactly right. I used to say to him and after him that he was an idea junkie. Like, that was what would keep him from going home. He had to really, he was such a devoted family man that getting home to his family was really important to him. But the thing that would tempt him to stay late was ideas, talking, meeting colleagues in the hall, students coming in. And so he actually kept a jar of peanut butter at his desk, just a jar of peanut butter, because he decided that he didn't want to, if he got up to go look for a snack or go to the cafeteria or whatever, he would be, it's just bright, shiny ideas everywhere. And he would stay longer than he wanted to. So he literally ate the peanut butter. So I'm not going to get myself distracted when I want to go home. But he was a guy who understood that he could learn from everybody. And so he was incredible. I mean, he was just a humble person, but I loved watching him talk to people. Every conversation, I still remember, isn't that interesting? Every conversation, he was hungry for, what can I learn from you? And then how does this help us think differently or better? It was just, honestly, it was so delightful to work with him. I used to say that he was sort of a combo of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the Jimmy Stewart character, and my childhood minister. He was a gentle, thoughtful, interested in exchanging ideas human being, and he loved learning from people, and he had so much to share. He always would say that he learned as much from his students as they learned from him. That was why he loved that last class. He was turning the lens back on them. How would you think about these questions, and he learned from them?
I love it. Well, let's talk about a couple of these theories. There's a mix of students and family business leaders and advisors on the call today. In the book, it talks about job satisfaction and lists, motivation and hygiene factors that go into what makes a job satisfying. Can you kind of take us through maybe the motivation and hygiene factors and how those play out in job satisfaction?
Sure. So this is a simple idea, but one that's, I think, pretty profound to think about as you're making your own career choices, is that so many of us make the decisions on the next job or whatever we think we want to do based on what we call in the book hygiene factors. The idea is that there are two different scales of motivation. One's hygiene factors and one's intrinsic motivators. And hygiene factors are what we tend to see and seek and think look like the reasons we'll be happy. I often describe them as all the things you might write on your resume. Title, the responsibility you have, the prestige of the company, do you have a fancy office? All those things feel like progress, and they feel like you should be proud of them, and you should. But the idea is that those things will not ultimately, at the top of that scale of motivation, will not necessarily make us feel fulfilled and happy with our work. The top of that scale is just not dissatisfied or not unfulfilled with our work. But that's not the same thing as being fulfilled and happy. So you need to have hygiene factors that are adequate. But the thing that makes a difference in the feeling of wanting to get out of bed in the morning and go to work, or being satisfied in your career for a long time, are what we call intrinsic motivators. And they're less easy to see and think about. And people don't often take the time to factor them in the choices that they're making. They're things like the intangibles, but do I feel respected by my colleagues? Am I being given a chance to grow? Do I believe in the mission of the organization? And am I satisfied by the leadership of this organization? There are things that when we're sitting in interviews and making pros and cons lists, we don't necessarily start thinking about those. But we believe that this theory will help you make better decisions about your career, because if you evaluate on both scales, are the hygiene factors okay? All the things that are the sort of facts and figures of it. And will you have current and continuing opportunities for intrinsic factors? It's what I think explains why people thrive as teachers or not-for-profits. It's not the money, it's not the prestige of it. There is intrinsic motivation that gets them up every day to do that work. And in the perfect world, you'll have great hygiene and great intrinsic motivators together. And if you think about making choices that way, we think you'll make better choices.
It's so tempting, though, to be distracted by all the hygiene factors when you're making that decision. And I imagine, especially for students coming out of school, many of them, are distracted by just the hygiene factors.
But we want you to have them. We want you to have good hygiene factors, but don't make that the only reason that you make the decisions. I can tell you from personal experience that those things last for about 6 months. For about 6 months, it's kind of cool to be working for the prestigious company or to have a fancier office or a better parking spot. But after a while, the lure of that just diminishes. Again, it just becomes a neutral for you. And until you have sort of ongoing intrinsic motivators, that's the difference between, I think, fuel and enthusiasm and oxygen, and just being okay.
Yeah. Well, let's go to another theory. There's a fantastic story about Honda and the motorcycles and the deliberate strategy and emergent strategies. So would you mind sharing, and maybe, I guess you can choose to personalize this one or not, but deliberate strategies and emergent strategies and how those play together.
Sure. So I'll tell the Honda story briefly, and then we can talk about. I'll share my personal story. So Honda, as we all know, is one of the leading car manufacturers in the United States, but that almost didn't happen because in the 60s, when Honda was first trying to break into the United States, they initially thought, we want to break in with the motorcycle market. We want to compete with Harley Davidson and all those miles of road in America. We have motorcycles here in Japan and we can bring them in. It'll be our foot in the door to America. And so they did a really tiny opening strategy, which was they opened one shop in Los Angeles, and they had their Japanese motorcycles that were known as Super Cubs. And they were trying to sell those in Los Angeles. And Super Cubs were smaller. They were more geared for city driving, which was more of the need in the market in Japan. And basically, nobody came into the shop. Nobody was interested in these motorcycles from Japan, and it looked like it was really just going to be a total bust. But sort of in frustration, some of the salespeople who were working in the one little showroom decided to take those Super Cubs out up into the hills, the dirt hills of Los Angeles, and just drive them around, kind of just to entertain themselves. I don't even know if they were supposed to be doing it. But as it turns out, a buyer for Sears was in those hills one of those days and said, those things look really fun. Could we consider making this something we sell in our sporting goods department? And Honda was absolutely not interested in that. Our deliberate strategy, our plan, what we are planning to do is compete with Harley Davidson in like an open road motorcycle. That would be taking us off track. So they resisted it for a really long time. But it turned out, luckily, somebody said, well, maybe we should try. And what ended up happening, as we all know, is that actually created a whole new category of more sophisticated sporting goods for Sears and other stores. But it was Honda's foot in the door to America. And, the rest, as they say, is history. If Honda had stuck with only seeing the one plan, the deliberate strategy, it would have been blind to this, what we call emergent opportunity, emergent strategy. And one of the central ideas of that chapter in the book is that all lives and careers are subject to an intertwining of those two. You can never just be focused on one or the other. Things may not magically happen to you. Emergent strategies may not happen, so you can focus on your deliberate. But it also may be that you need to constantly be open to the idea that other things could be the path to success. So we know from a lot of companies that start up, a chunk of companies that are successful don't end up being successful with the same strategy they started out with. They shifted along the way. Being open to emergent is how you're going to figure out ultimately what's the right path for you. And for me, the personal example was I was super, super deliberate with my career. I graduated from grad school and was on a train to New York for my first job, a week or two later. And then I was just deliberately pursuing being a business writer and editor for decades. That was what I wanted to do. It was only when I started working with Clay on this book and decided to shift my life and not work full-time at Harvard Business Review that I also became open to the joy of writing books and giving talks and working with Clay on projects that I liked. I was able to shift where I found the intrinsic motivators for me became different and really appealing. And if I hadn't been open to that and in a position to be open to that, my path would have been different. So it's about being open to the intertwining of the two types of deliberate and emergent strategy to get to the right place in the long run.
Very good. I feel like there are a lot of students that are graduating from university and still putting quite a bit of pressure on themselves to know exactly what they want to do for a long time. And I think this probably fits in the deliberate and emergent strategy, but go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a parent of two students who are just graduated or about to graduate, and looking back on my own life and then thinking about Clay's students, I of course, you need to earn a living and you need to be making progress. I understand that. But I think it's really important that you don't assume you know the deliberate strategy. Some people do. Some people are clear and focused and power to them. But a lot of us have to figure it out. And so I would ask you to be open to emergent as you figure it out and test things, because no 25-year-old or 28-year-old is so clear and so certain about what they want to do for so long that you shouldn't be shutting yourself off to the universe of opportunity. So I just would release yourself from that expectation. You can have goals, you can be testing things, but it's going to take a while before you're sure of your deliberate strategy.
Yeah. I do find there's a kind of a critical balance though, because there's this fear of missing out. And if I make one decision, I'm leaving 10 other opportunities behind. And sometimes I'm finding students getting paralyzed by the things they're leaving behind by making one decision. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I do. I mean, we actually know there's a lot of research that says loss aversion is more powerful. You know, the thought of what I'm losing is more powerful than the thought of what I'm gaining. It's why it's really hard to get consumers to switch to new products, even if their existing product isn't great, because they're sort of afraid of what they might lose. But there's a really useful tool that we talk about in the book that is by Rita McGrath and Ian McMillan from Columbia called Discovery-Driven Planning. And I wish I knew this earlier in my career, but I think it's useful to think about. The idea is when you're starting to make a decision like that, write down your expectations or your assumptions about what will prove true if you do this, make this choice, prove this path. You know, this job will allow me work-life balance in a healthy way so I can stay, you know, physically fit. This job will definitely give me opportunities to grow internally. This job will allow me to work in emerging markets, which I'm interested in. And write it down, like literally write it down, put it someplace. And then just check in every now and then to see, am I on track with this? Because if you make the assumptions and that's part of your decision making, you know why you made the choice, and you're checking in on those assumptions. And sometimes those things will not prove to be true. And so you then sometimes we forget or we retrofit our decision making. Yeah. If you know what you thought was important enough that you wanted to assume this path would take you that way, check in. If it's not working out, you can either, is there a way for me to shift and get this back? Or maybe I now need to see what the next opportunity will bring. But I think we all forget sometimes why we made choices, or we justify, I probably knew I was never going to get a lot of time in emerging markets. But if it was important to you, check in and see, can you make it a higher priority somehow, or do you need to change your opportunity?
Fantastic. Well, I want to take a quick pause and talk to the audience here and let them know, like, I'm not going to hog the whole time. So I want you to put your questions in the chat. I want to save the last 10 or 15 minutes if we have questions from the audience. So again, I don't want to have all the time here with Karen. So if you guys have questions, please do submit those in the chat, and we'll get to those in just a moment. One of the other concepts or theories that it's talked about is this concept of resource allocation. And the quote in the book says, in fact, how you allocate your own resources can make your life turn out to be exactly as you hope or different from what you intend. Can you talk about resource allocation and maybe how to navigate our scarce resources of time and energy?
The time for sure is the only resource we can't make more of, right? So it is the most precious resource. Energy too, but you can get better at energy. But the idea of that chapter, which is the one that most personally affected me and made me rethink my own life, is that a company can say what its strategy is and tell you, and in my case, it used to come down from the top floor, here's our strategy for the year, and set goals and things like that. But that may not be what actually happens, the strategy they execute, because strategy is formed in the everyday choices that employees make. This is more important than that. I'll spend our time and energy on this. We're going to cut a corner here or not. Strategy is not what you say it is. It's formed in the everyday ways that your employees allocate the resources of the company, their time, the resources, their personal energy. And that's where you are actually forming strategy. So a lot of companies do not successfully execute the strategy they say they're doing, because in reality, the choices that people are making on an everyday basis are not matching that. But in my case, the application to our personal lives is that the same thing's true for our personal lives, is that the strategy of your life, if you've articulated it or not, you are executing a strategy by the choices you make every day about how you spend your own time and your energy and your resources. And if you look at how you are doing that, how you're spending your own time and your energy, your focus and your attention, and it is not in a direction that supports what you say your strategy for your life is, you're not executing that strategy. And so for me, the personal kind of aha of working with Clay on this was that I absolutely would have told you that my family was the most important thing to me. And I love working. I'm not saying not loving working, but if I looked at my own resource allocation in the weeks, months, maybe years before I started working with Clay, I recognized that my resource allocation was not supporting that my family was the most important thing. And I think I had in my head a constant refrain of, soon as I get to this stage in my career, then I'll focus on my family or my personal life or my friendships, or my family will understand that, these bonds are forever, they'll never be frayed. And again, nothing was horrible, but I was not heading in the direction that I would have believed I was heading, or I said was most important. So it's a pretty profound thing to put yourself through that exercise of, and how am I actually spending my time and my energy routinely? And, sometimes there are exceptional periods, but on a routine basis, look at your calendar, be honest with yourself about how that day goes, how that month went, how the past 6 months went. And does it align with what is most important to you? Great. And if it doesn't, then you're heading in a different direction. Just know that you may be okay with that direction, but maybe it's not the one you want to head in the long run.
So Karen, for you, were you doing these check-ins with yourself, or was anyone else involved to help you think through clearly like how that was going? And that's kind of loaded because I'm asking thinking about my spouse, and am I being honest enough with myself, or do I need to have this check-in with someone that's also willing to be honest and give feedback?
Yes and yes. So, I don't think any of us can have the conversations we need to have if we're not being honest with ourselves, and you have to be ready for that. For me, I just felt this sort of bolt of lightning that this theory of resource allocation just completely hit me, that I really was not going in the direction that I thought I was, and I didn't want to be that. And I was, my kids were maybe 8, 9 at the time. They were young enough that I could still course correct, but old enough that I wondered, but you have to be ready personally. But when you are, I had conversations with my husband and then my extended family. It took a year to make the decisions that I made. And you have to decide together with the people who are important to you in your life, is what's important enough to make a priority. And do we both support this? And in my case, there were some sacrifices, financially and otherwise to do it, but zero regrets. It's over a decade later, and I'm super happy that I got to that decision point, and that my husband and I made the decisions together. And I did it with goodwill from HBR even. It was really nice. It took me a year to make the decision, and then we ended up keeping a professional relationship, and I have, such goodwill that they supported this. So it was really powerful theory for me personally, but yes, they're big decision. And I just disclaimer, I sort of say to people, I'm the ghost of Christmas future. You don't have to do what I did. Try to get your course correction in order before you get to the point where you feel like you have to make such a dramatic change. Any of us can look at our calendars and know there are some discretionary time choices that maybe we don't admit. You
stay longer than you want to at the office, kind of farting around. You're playing a game, or you're talking to people. You could be going home. We all find ways that we use the time in the day a little bit conveniently sometimes. So everyone can make some discretionary choices that are a little more focused on what matters to you. It could be other things other than your family. It could be physical fitness or supporting a cause that you love. My specifics are not going to be your specifics, but I'm showing you that it's possible to rethink using this theory and make sure you stay on track for the things that you care most about.
Yeah, very good. Well, we're having a number of questions come in, so let's go ahead and pivot to the audience. Jeff, do you want to add your voice to the call? Jeff Arnold, do you want to add your voice to the call and go ahead and ask Karen your question?
Sure. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Dave. Ultimately, I love his book and your book, and it's made a big difference for a number of people that I've shared it with. I love how he and you talk about schools of experience, and I'm finishing my MBA at the University of North Carolina currently, and I'm sharing it with fellow classmates. And I love how he thinks about, when I think about Clay's life, he probably looked backwards and thought about the schools of experience that made a big difference for him, and therefore was able to apply these theories and explain that to us because of his life. And so how does that relate for you and for him in measuring? That's my question. As you think about the schools of experience, I'm thinking about it in terms of future, right? We each purposefully plan a school of experience in order to get where we want to go. And then, the title of the article and the title of the book, how you measure, it's personal, right? And so how would you and Clay think about how those two things kind of converge?
So interesting question. I'll just give a quick summary what the schools of experience is referring to. That the idea is that, again, looking at people's perfect resumes and perfect credentials, we as human beings often look for the wrong things in getting people to the careers and the jobs that they want. You might only look for impeccable educational, if you're hiring someone, impeccable educational credentials or ones that match what your expectation of what someone should be. But a really, really valuable thing that people don't recognize is what experiences have they had that will allow them to do that job, or what experiences can you help them job, or can you personally be seeking to help you grow and be able to do the job better. So it's really valuable to not instantly think about the labels on things, but think of what experiences will help a person develop capabilities and skills. So the schools of experiences that, not that your resume doesn't matter, but you're going to grow much more as a person, and people that you're hiring can grow much more as individuals if you think about what experiences will help shape them and give them. So it could be anything from, can I launch a product with scarce resources? That's an experience that you've had, and that will make you more valuable in other circumstances where that's relevant. It could be, can I navigate a high bureaucracy and still get things done? All those experiences don't sound glamorous, but they're going to build the skills. And so if you're looking to a career progression that you have in mind, deliberate or emergent, what experiences do I need to get to make me better at getting to that job eventually? So it's the idea, it's a parenting lesson too. I think it's really powerful, is to make sure you give your kids, you put them through the school of experience so that they'll build skills and learn, even just to be resilient. So many parents, myself included, default to making things easy for them all the time because, we love them and they're tired and they're stretched so thin, and we don't want their life to be hard. And of course they'll learn from this. But what we're teaching them is that mom or dad will step in to solve things for them. And so sometimes it's very important, even though the consequences in the short term can be difficult or challenging, to let them learn from the school of experience so that they next time will be able to navigate that experience. So that's what the school experience is. And so how do you use it to measure? I mean, that's an interesting question. I think it would just be, did I deliberately build the experiences that got me towards my goal? So measuring is very personal. How will I measure my life? What did it amount to? But did I just let it happen to me, or did I embrace the opportunity to learn hard things, to do hard things towards an aim that I cared about? I guess that's how I would say you think about it in terms of measuring.
Very good. Tough question, Jeff. Cynthia, would you like to join your voice to the conversation and ask your question to Karen?
Sure, I'd be pleased to, Dave. And Karen, thank you so much. I may have missed this. I logged on a few minutes late, so let me back up with it. When you approach this topic, do you approach it with a moral imperative in mind? Is there an underlying philosophy, for example, that we have a moral obligation to contribute as much as we can to humanity while having a joyful life? Like, what do you do with that moral imperative and the possibility of people utterly selling out on such a moral imperative?
That's a very interesting question, Cynthia. So I think the answer is personal. Me personally, I do feel like there's a moral imperative, but again, until I even thought about my own purpose and measuring my own life, I don't think I had put the pieces together of what things I cared about accomplishing. I know Clay felt that helping people in whatever ways he could, that was the important thing to him. I think the moral imperative can be personal, sadly. Maybe not everyone shares it, but I think it can also be meaningful to you personally. So I think I would encourage everyone to think about that from their own perspective. My purpose may not be your purpose, and that's okay. But we both need to think about it, and we both need to make decisions that track with the purpose that we've decided is important to us.
Can I add one thing to that? I feel like sometimes we have like a target that we're aiming for that doesn't necessarily have a moral purpose, but then success happens and you arrive at that mountaintop and you're unfulfilled. And it's sometimes in those moments where you figure out there needs to be something more, there needs to be something different. And I've seen that with several friends that maybe were askew in terms of how they were allocating resources and time towards just creating a financial success in their life. And when they arrived at that financial success and they still felt unfulfilled, it was a moment of reflection and a moment that gave them an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm gonna do something different. But I do think it's really, really personal.
I think that's a great insight, Dave. And I think it is personal, but I think for many people that can be an intrinsic motivator. It can be a reason that they choose to do what they do. And I don't negate the importance of having financial security. And I get that, totally get that. But it doesn't mean you can't be kind of continuing to build towards the purpose as you're trying to establish that. You need to make choices to put food on your table and shelter. But as you're doing that, don't forget that whatever your purpose, your other personal purpose is, it's going to bring you happiness in the long run.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
If there are other questions, go ahead and keep them coming in the chat. I'll go back to one of the questions that I have for Karen. This one has to do with the story of Dell computers and how they started to outsource certain components of the computer, and it kind of got away from them. Anyways, the question is around why resources, processes, and priorities are such crucial elements to not only business, but to families. Can you maybe tell the story a little bit about Dell, and then if you could get to that question.
Sure. So many of us, a lot of you look maybe younger than remembering this, but Dell was a very successful computer manufacturer for a long time. And as they were trying to become more profitable, and Dell's model was basically to thin margins, be a little bit cheaper, bring more to the bottom line for them, they started outsourcing individual parts to Asus, which is a Taiwanese company. And originally it started off, I can't remember, circuit board, some small part. And Asus would happy to do it, happy to be a supplier for these things. And then little by little, Asus would be, can we do this part? Can we do this part? How about if we manufacture the whole computer here? What if we even ship them from here? Little by little, it became that Asus did everything, and they learned the best way to make things, put them together, get them out. They learned all those things, and then Dell's name went on it. Dell sold it, and Dell's name went on it. And at a certain point, you recognize that's really no longer a Dell computer, it's an Asus computer. And Asus did flip and become its own company and its own competitor, competing with Dell. And Dell had given up so much in the process of letting Asus take all of those things from it, because individually on the books, it looked good. But the reality is that organizations and human beings, you learn things, you build capabilities, you have intangible knowledge, you go through schools of experience by making decisions about your resources, how much time and energy and money are we going to spend on this thing, and your processes. How do we know how to do what we do? That's a really intangible thing, and that's often something that organizations don't think about, the unique way that your processes lead to an outcome for you, and your priorities, what matters most. How do we make decisions between this path or this path? And as Dell was outsourcing the individual components and manufacturing it, in effect, they were outsourcing their resources, the processes, and priorities to Asus. And Asus learned from it, and Asus built capabilities. And then Asus ultimately became, it won. It basically took over. And that's a theory we can apply to our family lives too. It's so tempting to outsource so much of the values and the resources and how you do things as a family with your kids. This is how our family responds to lack of kindness in the world, or this is how our family treats other people. Those intangible things. If your kids are not learning it from you, you're giving away the potential for them to get that from someone else. And so someone else is going to shape and build their capabilities. It's not saying we don't need help in our life and they don't need to be part of organized sports and lots of things. But if all of it gets outsourced, then the capabilities that your children will build in the long run are not ones that came from you, that came from other people. And maybe you're happy with that, but it may not be what you're intending.
It's such an important question, especially personalizing that, and what will we outsource, whether it's the education of our children, and how much are we just leaning on whatever they learn at school, and how much are we participating in that education and informing it, and encouraging them to challenge and to really learn through the questioning of the things that they're learning. and even the small things, whether it's yard work or things like that. Like if we're
Mhm.
outsourcing everything, like will my kids know how to maintain a yard? Like if that matters, but I do think it's important to be deliberate about thinking about what are we outsourcing. Thanks, Karen. We have a couple of hands up. David Chen, I saw your hand. Do you have a question?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me? I'm in my car.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, Clay was very influential on my life. He was my first year technology and operations management professor at Harvard Business School. So thank you, Karen, for sharing your comments. For me, it's about discovery of purpose because I help startups with their capital raise, and I invest in startups. And I guess in your conversations with Clay, Karen, did you ever talk about the process of discovery of purpose? I know we talk about purpose throughout our lives, from fresh grads to mid-career professionals, but I guess, is there a methodology that Clay shared with you in terms of how to best go about this to discover what purpose is for individuals?
It was something Clay struggled with explaining because he felt it was so personal, and what he did was so different. He was so guided by his religious beliefs. So as you know, that was a foundation for him. So his purpose was very personal. I think he would say, if you don't think about it, you won't find your purpose. That even the act of starting to think about it, and it will take some time. Nobody, it's not easy to find purpose. And the thing I would add to it, just from a personal perspective, is so many of us start off with a really lofty idea of what purpose has to be, right? I'm going to change the world. I'm going to cure cancer. I'm going to do something really profound. Yeah, absolutely. If that is your purpose, go for it. But it's also possible to find purpose in everyday moments, in smaller ways. My purpose for a long time, my personal purpose has felt really important to make sure that I'm helping a younger generation of writers and thinkers and colleagues get better at what they do and mentor them. And that's not going to be on my gravestone someday, but that feels really important to me. It's not as big as some people's purpose, but that's important to me, in addition to all the personal sense of purpose for me as a parent and a spouse and all that stuff. Thank you, Hannah.
And I imagine that the notion of purpose can change over the course of your life, because what is belief versus knowing? In truth,
I think it
what
should.
is purpose?
I think it should. I think you need to reevaluate all the time. That's why none of us come down from the mountaintop with stones that tell us exactly the meaning of life. And I think you should be constantly reevaluating for yourself. And it's possible, I think, to have different phases of purpose in your life, and that's okay. The point of purpose is to make decisions that are going to get you where you want to be. And it's okay if your destination changes a little bit. At least you know why you're going there, and at least you know why you're going someplace else after that, because it hasn't just happened to you. You've thought about it.
Yeah, I was going to add, I think we need to be patient and kind to ourselves, but deliberate in our process of seeking that purpose. Because, we want it now. We want clarity, so that we can start now. And oftentimes it is messy. We're trying things, and along the way we learn it. We have those things emerge for us that we want to chase, and so I think we need to add a level of patience and kindness for ourselves as we're finding it.
Completely agree.
Yeah. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Stephen, you had your hand up. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. It's been really a inspiring conversation about purpose, and not having actually read the book, assuming that we know what matters, or at least approaching the idea and figuring what matters is not always a simple task, and it requires a lot of self-reflection. I was just curious, in terms of how you measure what matters, how have you gone about the process of figuring out what are these units, if I can say, measurements, because not everything that counts can be counted, and we know that not everything that can be counted may count. So what's been helpful in your approach? I wish I had some magical thermometer that can tell me that I'm on purpose, and just like a compass, but sometimes it's not that clear. There's a lot of things that you can measure and use a yardstick. If you want to lose weight, you can measure. The scale doesn't lie, but how
my scale does. My scale lies.
Yeah, how have you found, and what approach have you used in terms of finding the units of measurement and going about that process of measuring what matters, especially when it comes to sort of these abstract notions of purpose and things like that?
It's an interesting question. I think for me personally, it's been a kind of periodic self check-in, and also obviously with my husband and my family, are we on track? You know, it's just asking that question. But I've seen people do some really interesting things. I know someone who journals. He decided the 6 things that were most important to him in life, and he made a similar career shift that I had, went off the super fast track to one that allowed him to be the person he wanted to be. He actually identified roles for himself. I want to be a spiritual person. I want to be a family person. I want to be a community person. And then every Sunday night, I think he journals, how did I do against all of these goals? And so he does actually sort of hold himself accountable on a weekly basis. There's probably something in the middle. I don't know. You know, it's asking for a hard number on something that is a feeling. But for me personally, I know when it's wrong. I do know that. I know when I'm sort of gotten a little bit off kilter. I know how I feel about my time. I know when I'm giving something short shrift. I know the single biggest change in my life, I think the single biggest change from before to now, is that I try to be truly present with people when I'm with them. I was a repeat offender of the casual check-in. I'm with you in a minute. And I think, my heart breaks when I think of all the times that my kids probably got used to me being like, just 1 minute, just one more. I now try to be, when I am present, really present. And I think that's the biggest change for me. And I just know that that's just a feeling that I am or am not doing that thing that I've decided was really important to me. And it's catalytically different, honestly, just making that choice. Maybe not as many minutes, but the minutes I'm there, I am really present with you.
I would add one other thing to that. Tell the people that you care about and the people that are a part of your priority, tell them what your intent is, and then ask them how you're doing.
Great. Open up and be ready for the answers, but it's also an indication to them that you care about getting it right.
Yeah. My kids will always tell me the truth. And it doesn't always feel good if it's, well, you're gone too much, but that's sometimes the feedback that we need. Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, our time has flown, Karen. I really appreciate the way that you showed up today, so giving and so generous and vulnerable also in sharing your personal story. I'm so thankful that you helped Clay document this and share it with the world. And so anyways, just wanted to express my gratitude, and thank you all for investing your time with Karen and I and at Authors at Drucker. I will close with a couple of housekeeping items. At the Global Family Business Institute, we have a couple of initiatives I'm really excited about. One is a certificate program in advising family enterprises, and it's really focused on the non-financial challenges that successful businesses create. If you're interested in learning more about that, feel free to shoot me an email. We're also developing what's called a Generational Wealth Masterclass, and that's a collaboration that I've done with Jay Hughes. We have 25 different videos in a series, and if you'd like to learn more about that is specifically aimed at wealth holding families, and again, the unique dynamic that financial success creates. So anyways, again, thank you all for investing your time, and Karen, once again, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you guys for a good
Have a great day.